My name is Grace Whitman. I'm 38 years old, living in a quiet coastal town in North Carolina. I used to believe I had everything: two well-behaved children, a beautiful home with an ocean view, and a successful husband. Landon, a 43-year-old architect I had loved for 15 years. But on the night of our anniversary, while I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, I heard a familiar whisper coming from the balcony. It wasn't meant for me, but for Amber, my cousin who had been staying with us after her so-called heartbreak. I feel guilty, Landon, but I don't want to stop. Have you ever stood in your own home and realized everything had been rotting from the inside for a long time? If you've ever felt betrayed by the very people closest to you, leave a comment. Hit like if you believe the truth should always come out. And don't forget to follow the channel to hear the next part, where I'll tell you why that dinner party was only the beginning of their downfall. I used to be an ambitious girl. I graduated with a degree in literature from Boston and landed a job as an editor at a major publishing house in New York. I imagined a life filled with books, city lights, and coffee dates with the authors I admired. Then Landon proposed, and I said yes before even asking myself whether my dreams still had a place in this new life. We moved to the coastal town where he grew up, starting over in an old house his parents had left behind. Landon started building his architecture firm, and I took on some freelance work. Just temporarily, I thought. But temporary quickly turned into permanent. I ran the household, gave birth to 2 kids, and managed everything from the background. Every time I brought up going back to work full-time, Landon would smile gently and say, "Wait until the kids are older, okay? You're the backbone of this family." Once, I got an offer to work as an editor for a literary magazine in Raleigh. I hadn't even finished speaking when Landon casually said, "Who's going to make dinner, drive the kids, or pay the bills if you're working all week?" So I closed the laptop and told myself that love meant sacrifice. Amber came into our lives during a windy spring. My cousin, 3 years younger than me, had always been someone I protected when we were little, after her mom remarried and left her with our grandparents. Amber had stolen my first boyfriend in high school. She was also the reason our Hawaii vacation turned into a disaster when she vanished with my car for 3 hours without explanation. But every time I forgave her, because she was family. When Amber called me last year, her voice breaking after the end of a 5-year relationship, I didn't hesitate. I told her she could stay with us as long as she needed. I even cleared out my home office for her, giving up my bookshelf and vanity. Amber had the kind of beauty that made people let their guard down. Tall, honey blonde, with a soft voice. She made coffee every morning, helped me cook, told jokes with the kids. I used to feel warm seeing Landon laugh with her in the kitchen, until I realized that smile wasn't meant for me anymore. Landon always blamed work for coming home late. Some nights he said he had client meetings in Charleston, but I found unwashed shirts that smelled like unfamiliar perfume. I confronted him once, just once. He frowned and said I was too sensitive and needed to trust him. I did trust him. I thought that's what marriage was: times of distance, then reconnection. I thought if I cooked better dinners, stayed cheerful, and became an easier wife, things would be fine. But the more I tried, the more invisible I felt. Our conversations revolved around school schedules, electricity bills, and the next dishwasher maintenance. And I couldn't even remember the last time someone asked, "Are you okay?" Landon didn't cheat because I did something wrong. And our marriage didn't fall apart because I was too busy chasing a career. I had given up too much to be blamed for any of it. But the most painful part wasn't that Landon chose to betray me. It was that he chose her. The girl I once saw as a sister. The girl who ate the meals I cooked, slept in the room I prepared, played with my children in the yard I cared for. And worse than that, I had seen the signs. I had felt the shift. But I brushed it off because I didn't want to believe the people I loved could do something unforgivable behind my back. I don't remember how long I sat at the kitchen table after that night. I just remember the porch light bleeding through white curtains, the salty breeze in the air, and Landon's voice echoing in my mind like a film on rewind. But instead of screaming or kicking Amber out, I chose silence. Silence so I could listen more carefully. From that day on, I reset the tiny voice recorder hidden inside the tea jar on the kitchen shelf every morning. I created a private folder on my laptop, named it Summer Winds. something that sounded like an unfinished writing project, but in truth it was a detailed log of their suspicious behavior. Time, messages, glances, gestures. Like the night Landon drove Amber home after a client dinner, parked by the curb for 10 minutes, engine still running, neither of them stepping out. I began noticing the small things I had trained myself to ignore. The perfume on Landon's collar wasn't one I'd ever bought. The way Amber made her coffee every morning suddenly matched Landon's exact taste. Almond milk, no sugar, cinnamon on top. His hand brushing the small of her back as they passed each other in the kitchen. A split second, but enough to chill me. One night, after Landon fell asleep on the couch, I gently took his office keys under the excuse of looking for the tax documents he asked me to prep. That was the cover. What I was really searching for was the truth. In the left drawer beneath old client files and utility bills, I found a leather-bound folder filled with clipped papers. No title, no signatures, but detailed clauses. A draft of a divorce settlement, with everything skewed against me. Landon proposed to divide assets based on current contribution, meaning I, with no steady income, would receive a small share. He would keep the house. Even custody of the children was marked as subject to review due to the mother's inconsistent work schedule. I flipped to the last page. A handwritten note in pen. Wait until after the July trip. Don't rush. My whole body went cold. I sat in the dark of his office for 3 straight hours, listening to the ticking wall clock and the wind tapping against the window pane. For years I had called this his creative space, and yet this was where he'd hidden the blueprint for quietly erasing me from his life. I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough to understand that when a husband quietly prepares a draft divorce agreement, even before anything explodes, it means he made his decision a long time ago. Everything he said to me each day was just part of a play, and I was the only one who hadn't read the script. I thought I'd hit rock bottom, but the real bottom came the following week when I opened one of Landon's old emails while searching for a past invoice for our tax records. I found a notification of a business ownership transfer, sent from his attorney nearly 6 months earlier. The ownership structure of Whitman Design had changed, from co-founders, myself, representing the initial family investment, to a personal development trust, controlled solely by Landon. No meeting, no discussion, not a single word of consultation. I called my aunt, the one who had lent us the startup capital to launch the company more than 10 years ago. She hesitated for a long time, then admitted, Landon said the company was going through financial difficulties, so he proposed restructuring to attract new investors. I didn't think much of it because he's your husband. A simple sentence, but it hit me like a slap. I had built my life on trust, a trust that was never returned. Landon didn't just cheat, he quietly erased every trace of me from the career we had built together. Amber didn't just betray me as family. She stood beside that man, smiling, while I, the one who packed every lunch, attended every parent-teacher meeting, and carried the unseen weight of our life, was pushed out without even knowing. I had thought Amber was the limit, the worst pain a wife could endure. But I was wrong. A few days after discovering the divorce draft and the ownership transfer, I hired a private investigator, not because I liked suspicion, but because I needed the truth. And I needed to prepare myself and our 2 children before everything collapsed beyond control. 3 weeks later, he handed me a thick file wrapped in a black leather cover. No commentary, no judgment. He simply placed it in front of me with one line. You should read this alone. I read it through the afternoon, sitting in my parked car by the bay, the same place where Landon and I had our first date. Dimly lit photos from restaurants, resorts, hotel bars. Receipts from Las Vegas, Miami, Cancun. Some matching nights Landon had claimed he was attending design conferences in Boston or meeting clients in Seattle. His face appeared in multiple photos, always with different women. One of them, Kelsey, nearly 10 years younger than me, had once sent a birthday card to Aiden. It was signed Uncle Landon and Aunt Kay. I had thought she was a partner from a southern construction firm. Turns out, she was a mistress. I started shaking with rage, not just because he was cheating, but because he brought these women near my children, near my world, secretly, without warning, as if he had the right to blur the line between 2 lives I had worked so hard to keep separate. the life of a mother and the life of the betrayed. While combing through our joint bank statements looking for a suspicious charge, I stumbled across a secondary credit card opened under the company's name, one I'd never heard of. The statements were being sent to a private mailbox Landon had never mentioned. Most charges were encrypted, but my investigator managed to trace a few: a boutique hotel in Aspen, a couple's spa in Sonoma, a digestation dinner costing over $300 per person. I hadn't had a meal like that in over 10 years. I thought I had grown used to being forgotten, to being overlooked on special occasions. But when faced with this undeniable evidence, every small hurt I'd ever swallowed came rushing back, every broken promise, every last-minute cancellation, every time he said, "Don't overthink it." They weren't accidents, they were calculated. I nearly closed the file and shut myself off completely, until the next morning when I received an anonymous email. Subject: "There's something you need to know about your husband." At first I thought it was spam, but the body contained only 2 lines. "I used to work for Whitman Design. I don't know if you'll believe me, but Landon once suggested I sleep with him to keep my job. I'm not the only one. I'm just the only one who quit." Attached was a screenshot of an internal email where Landon invited a female employee to his hotel room after a conference, promising, "We'll talk more about your role in the new project." I sat frozen, both hands on the keyboard, palms ice cold. This wasn't just betrayal of a wife, not just betrayal of a family. Landon had betrayed what it means to be a man, a leader, a father. I thought of my daughter, Lily, 9 years old, with soft curls, always asking her dad about house designs while playing with building blocks. She adored him to an irrational degree, and he used his power to make other women feel small or force them to choose between dignity and career. And I thought, if I did nothing, Lily would grow up believing this was normal. I couldn't let that happen. Not another child raised in a respectable family that was really a stage set for deception. I used to think the most painful part of a broken marriage was the betrayal. But now I understand. The deeper agony is realizing how long you've let yourself be passive. I no longer had time to wait for someone to save me from that pain. I had to walk out on my own. I scheduled a meeting with Elaine Foster, a lawyer specializing in marital asset protection, recommended by an old college friend. Elaine was in her 50s, with cropped silver hair and a voice sharp and calm like a blade. She listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, eyes locked on mine as if reading every thought behind my words. "Grace," she said after reviewing the divorce draft I'd found in Landon's desk, "if you don't act now, you're going to lose everything. He's prepared this carefully. I'm not here to destroy. I just want to protect what belongs to me and my children." Elaine gently squeezed my hand. "Then from now on, we stop acting on emotion. We act on strategy." I began living 2 lives. One was the gentle wife, still making dinner, still asking Landon about his meetings, still smiling when Amber shared her morning yoga updates. The other was a woman, quietly opening a separate bank account under her maiden name, gradually moving small amounts of savings from my freelance editing jobs, previously pooled into our joint account, into my own. I didn't withdraw large sums, just a little at a time, like grocery expenses. But with every transfer, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. I also started reviewing the original investment contract between my family and Landon's company from 10 years ago. My aunt, who had provided a large sum to help Landon launch Whitman Design, once told me, "There's paperwork, but I never paid much attention." I was different. I kept everything. I asked Camille, my closest college friend, now a senior auditor at a financial firm in Raleigh, to review the statements I had secretly copied from Landon's computer. Camille wasn't easily shocked, but by page 8, her brows furrowed. "You know," she said, "this isn't just hiding money from a spouse. This could be embezzlement. Some of these entries are tied to public funds, the community library project his firm bid on last year." My throat went dry. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore, it was financial crime. It involved reputation, legal consequences, and our children's future. "How far do you want to go, Grace?" Camille asked softly. I stayed quiet for a long while, then I said, "Far enough that there's no coming back." I also started thinking about Aiden and Lily, two innocent kids caught in the middle of this storm. I contacted the school counseling office and scheduled a private meeting with the school psychologist. I didn't share the full truth. I simply said our family was going through some changes and that I wanted the kids to have someone to talk to if they ever felt unsettled. I also took them to see Dr. Rachel, a family therapist in Wilmington with experience helping children through divorce. I told them we were trying a few mind health sessions. No mention of separation. No early worries planted. Lily was a little hesitant, but Aiden, with the quiet poise of a preteen, nodded. I don't know why, he whispered to Dr. Rachel during one session, which I overheard from the hallway, but Mom's been quiet a lot lately, and Dad, he looks at his phone more than he looks at her. I turned away, tears falling into my hands. I knew our lives were about to shift course and I couldn't shield them from everything. But I could prepare. I could lay down new foundations so they wouldn't feel abandoned in the middle of an emotional earthquake no one warned them about. Landon was still preoccupied with Amber and his urgent project calls. He had no idea I'd been slowly pulling power away from him piece by piece. And I, the woman who once cried silently in the kitchen to keep peace in the house, had started planning, not for some loud retaliation, but for a quiet, calculated, irreversible exit. We chose Friday night, the one we used to call family night, to host our 16th anniversary party. I sent out printed invitations on thick cardstock, gold embossed lettering complete with RSVP QR codes. Everything was planned down to the smallest detail, so Landon suspected nothing. He even picked the wine himself and suggested a few menu items. No need to hire a chef, he said. We can cook. I smiled, but I quietly booked catering from a high-end restaurant in Wilmington. I wanted the night to be perfect, even if it marked the end of what was once called a home. Amber tried to decline at first. You won't mind if I skip it, right? She said, avoiding eye contact. My friend in Charlotte just had a baby. I was thinking of visiting. I looked at her calmly. Your family, it wouldn't be complete without you. So she stayed. I chose a classic blue dress, the same shade as the one I wore in our wedding photo, now buried deep in the back of a drawer. I did my hair, soft makeup, nothing too flashy, but enough to make people look twice. As the guests arrived, Landon greeted each one personally, hugging my mother, shaking hands with investors, carrying himself like he still held the world in his hands. Amber kept her distance. Smiling, polite, playing her role as the cousin recovering from a breakup, temporarily staying with her big sister. No one suspected a thing. I made sure they didn't. We had dinner out in the backyard, under string lights draped along the porch beams. People laughed, raised glasses, toasted to a couple resilient and strong through the storms. Someone even joked, Landon's the luckiest man in town, and he laughed, turning to look at me out of reflex. I smiled back even though my heart had long turned to ice. A dessert? A chocolate mousse cake the whole family loved. I stood up, lifted my wine glass, and gently tapped it with a spoon. The chime was soft but clear enough to hush the crowd. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. 16 years is a long journey. We have a lot to be grateful for. 2 healthy kids, a beautiful home, a stable career. I continued, but sometimes the truth doesn't show up in family photos or in heartfelt speeches. I set down the glass and reached behind my chair for a leather folder. Inside were documents printed during long hours with my lawyer and Camille. Financial evidence, email copies, photographs, asset declarations, and a note titled, Divorce Plan, Preparation Phase. I placed the folder in front of Mr. Douglas Kerr, Landon's lead investor and the father figure he had always sought approval from. Mr. Kerr furrowed his brows, flipping through the pages, pausing on sections underlined in red ink. Then I turned to the guests. For more than a year, I said slowly, I've uncovered things about this marriage and about the company I once thought we built together. I paused, eyes resting on Amber, and about people I once called family. The atmosphere dropped. Amber went pale. Landon's grip tightened on the back of his chair, all color drained from his face. Then, as if perfectly timed, the doorbell rang. Two men in dark suits stepped in, flashing federal investigator badges. "Mr. Landon Whitman," one of them said, "we need you to cooperate in an investigation regarding financial misconduct tied to public contracts." No one said a word, just the clink of cutlery hastily dropped and murmurs from stunned guests. Landon stood, about to respond, but Mr. Kerr spoke first. "I've seen enough. We'll talk at the boardroom on Monday." Amber shot up, stammering something, but my mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder, holding her back. I didn't look at Landon as he followed the investigators out. I looked at the flickering candle in the center of the table and, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was shaking anymore. Landon was escorted onto the porch, his face pale, a far cry from the calm man who'd toasted me earlier. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into an odd silence. The smell of chocolate mousse still lingered, but all the sweetness had vanished. I turned back to the table and said calmly, "The party is over. Please feel free to leave whenever you're ready." No one moved right away. Amber stood frozen, colorless, her lips trembled, and finally she managed to speak, almost broken. How long have you known?" I looked her in the eye, long enough to know this wasn't a random mistake. It was a repeated choice. "I didn't," she began, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. Don't say you didn't mean to. You lived in my house, played with my kids, sat at my dinner table, and secretly planned to replace me." Amber burst into tears, mascara streaking down her face. "I didn't know it would go this far. I love him, but I swear I never wanted to hurt you." I shook my head. "You didn't have to want to, you did." She stepped toward me, maybe to reach for my hand, but I took half a step back and said firmly, "Pack your things, leave my house tonight." She froze. "But I don't have anywhere to go." My voice didn't change. "You had a plan for everything else. I'm sure you'll figure it out." My mother stepped forward, placing a light hand on my shoulder. "Grace, let me help Amber pack," she said softly, eyes refusing to meet anyone's. I knew she felt humiliated too. Amber walked up the stairs like someone waking from a nightmare, the clack of her heels echoing through the empty space. None of the guests stayed. Some bowed their heads slightly as they passed me, others avoided eye contact. Only Mr. Douglas Kerr paused, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, and you're stronger than most people I've ever known. Thank you for coming." He nodded, then walked away. I waited until the house was filled with nothing but the ticking of the clock and the scent of jasmine drifting from the back porch. When my mother came down the stairs, she spoke softly, without looking at me. "She's packing. Do you want me to stay tonight?" I shook my head. "I'm fine." She looked at me for a moment longer, then nodded. Before leaving, she said only one thing. "You didn't let others speak for you this time. I'm proud of you." I stood by the window, watching her car pull away from the driveway. Amber's shadow flickered upstairs, light casting through the white curtains. I didn't need to see clearly to know her hands were trembling as she packed each item. Then my phone rang. It was Elaine. "I've filed an emergency motion to freeze all personal and business assets tied to Landon," she said. "The judge signed it late this afternoon. We're one step ahead." "Grace?" Elaine's voice slowed. "I reviewed the secondary account under his name. If we can prove the funds came from sources tied to public contracts, there could be additional federal charges." "He won't just lose his reputation," I replied, my voice flat. "He'll lose his freedom." Elaine was silent for a few seconds. "Are you sure you're ready to take this all the way?" "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want my kids to grow up in a world where men don't get to do terrible things and still keep everything the same." Elaine said nothing more. She understood. I hung up. An hour later, Amber dragged her suitcase downstairs. She wasn't crying anymore, just pale and thinner, as if in a matter of hours she had lost everything she once held. I didn't see her out. I stood behind the kitchen door and watched. 2 weeks after that fateful party, the court issued a temporary suspension of Landon's executive authority at Whitman Design. Notices were sent to all partners, contractors, and board members. No one was surprised. Some called me with concerned voices. Others stayed silent. But I knew they had picked their side. Landon hired a criminal defense attorney after his second summons. Elaine sent me a copy of the interrogation summary. Beyond financial fraud, the investigation now included allegations of misappropriation of public funds, tied to 2 state-funded projects. Jail time could be reduced to probation if Landon cooperated and returned the stolen money. But the cost would be his reputation and nearly all of his company shares. I didn't attend the first hearing. Elaine represented me, bringing every piece of evidence. Landon didn't look at her. I was told he sat in silence, only speaking once when asked if he had anything to say. I lost everything because of my own stupidity. As for Amber, she vanished from town 3 days after that night. My aunt, Amber's mother, called me around midnight, her voice shaking. Grace, she didn't tell anyone, just left a letter of apology and some cash in an envelope. I haven't dared to open it. I didn't respond right away. Then after a moment I said gently, I hope you're at peace. Amber has to take responsibility. For herself. There's nothing more I can do. I heard soft sobbing on the other end, but this time I felt no guilt. She lost her job at the ad agency she once claimed was just temporary before going back into events. The story spread faster than I expected, not because I told it, but because the people she used had turned their backs. I was invited to interview at Mayfair Publishing in Boston, the same company I had declined over 15 years ago to follow Landon to the coastal town. This time, I walked into the conference room with a resume that needed no embellishment. Remote editing experience, independent projects, and a half-finished novel manuscript. They didn't ask why I had a career gap. They asked, what did you learn during your time as a full-time mom? I smiled, meeting the interviewer's eyes. I learned how to organize a crisis before it begins. 4 days later, I received an email offering me the role of Associate Creative Editorial Director. The salary was enough to support both of my children without needing any assistance from Landon, apart from the court-mandated asset division. That evening, I called Aiden and Lily to the kitchen table and laid out a map. I want to ask you something, I said. If we moved somewhere new, not far, but a place where I get to do what I love, would you be okay with that? Aiden looked at me for a moment, then asked, will there be good ice cream? I laughed, yes. And there's a park and a library too. Willie hugged me from behind. I just want you to keep smiling like you are now. We moved out of the old house in early fall when the leaves began to turn and the air turned crisp. I sold the house to a young couple expecting their first baby. The wife, just over 30, hugged me on the front porch and said, you've kept this place so beautiful. I didn't tell her it had once held oceans of tears. I simply wished her peace. Our new apartment was on the 4th floor of a classic red brick building in Back Bay, close to the park, schools, and only a 10-minute walk to the publishing office. It was smaller, no backyard, no ocean view, but it was mine. Mornings in Boston often began with the scent of coffee from the cafe on the corner and the sound of hurried footsteps on the brick sidewalks. But in our 4th floor apartment, the day always began with something softer. The sound of piano notes drifting from Aiden's room. He started learning piano after we moved. At first, it was just an elective at school. Then gradually it became something he looked forward to each afternoon. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. Aiden didn't play to perform, he played to quiet his mind. I understood that. I once wrote for the same reason. Lily was the opposite. She loved light, movement, expression. I bought her a small camera after catching her secretly photographing sunsets from the balcony with her phone. One of those photos is now printed, framed, and hanging in the hallway that leads to her room. This'll be the first book cover I design, Lily told me one evening as we baked cookies together. I'm not sure I'll be a photographer, but I want to keep this feeling. Like holding on to a moment before it disappears. Capturing emotion is the most important thing. Do whatever you want, as long as you don't lose yourself. The kids don't ask about their father as much anymore. They still talk on the phone once a week, on Saturday mornings. I don't interfere. But I don't insert myself either. They need space to understand, to decide for themselves what kind of relationship they want with Landon. I'm just here, quietly steady, like an anchor in case they drift. As for me, I haven't thought about dating, not because I'm hurt, not because I'm afraid. I just haven't felt the need. My life now feels like a field freshly cleared after a storm. No more chaos. No more illusions. I want to know exactly what I'm planting, what I'm nurturing, and what I hope to harvest before I ever let anyone in again. I've been writing more. Beyond my job at the publishing house, I started a personal blog where I share what it's like to be a woman who once gave up her career, who once sacrificed quietly, who once believed in love too blindly, and who once stood back up when there was nothing left to lean on. No one knows the blog is mine. I use a pen name. But the inbox gets hundreds of messages every week from women I've never met. They tell me their stories. They say my posts feel like they're hearing from a friend who walked just a few steps ahead, someone brave enough to say what they're still afraid to speak. I read every line, not because I need admiration, but because I know what it feels like to be stuck, dismissed, called too okay to need care. One late October afternoon, I sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of cinnamon tea, soft sunlight warming the shoulders of my sweater. Lily was arranging her photos inside. Aiden had just finished his online piano lesson. The apartment was quiet, but not lonely. I looked up at the sky, now brushed in autumn tones, and I felt grateful. Not to Landon, not to Amber. Grateful to myself for not choosing silence, for not letting the pain harden me into a bitter, broken woman. Grateful for choosing to end it, even if it was late, even if it was hard, because it was still an ending. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter. Amber, I'm not writing this to reopen anything. I just want you to know that I no longer carry anger toward you. You were wrong. But you no longer have the power to hurt me again. I chose forgiveness, not to free you, but to free myself. There's nothing left to hold on to, and nothing worth clinging to. That door is closed, but I do hope you find a better way to live from this point forward. Grace. I sent the letter without expecting a reply. Not every circle needs to close with a conversation. Some scars are best left untouched. But I knew that with that letter, I had ended a quiet loop that had lingered for years. I don't remember the exact day I recorded the first episode of the podcast Things I Never Said Out Loud. I only remember that when I pressed the record button on the little microphone sitting in the middle of the kitchen table, my hands were trembling, and my voice was hoarse from too many years of saying too little. Hi, my name is Grace Whitman. I'm a mother, an editor, a woman who once believed that if I loved hard enough, things couldn't fall apart. I was wrong. But what makes me strong is that I didn't let that mistake define the rest of my life. I never thought that voice, coming from a small Boston kitchen, would reach thousands, but within just 3 weeks the podcast inbox was overflowing with stories. One person wrote, I lived 25 years in a silent marriage. Your story made me feel like I'm not crazy. You don't know me, but I've listened to that episode 3 times. I don't feel weak anymore. One message contained only 3 words, I'm still here. I read each line like someone piecing together shards of broken glass, sharp, but finally showing reflections I'd never seen before. I talked about the nights I did the dishes while my tears fell with the soap suds. About the times I lay next to a husband and still felt like I was sleeping alone. About the moment I opened the washing machine and found a strange handkerchief, then convinced myself it probably belonged to a friend. I shared how Aiden played his first piano note wrong but kept playing anyway, how Lily's first photo came out overexposed but still brought tears to my eyes. I talked about the first time I walked into the meeting room at my new publishing house, heart pounding, unsure if I had any value left after all those years on the sidelines. But I was heard, respected, trusted, not because of who I stood beside, but because of who I was. A year passed like a long breath after a decades-long ache. I wasn't the betrayed woman anymore. I was the woman who survived betrayal. More importantly, I was the woman who turned pain into a new foundation. Landon still lives in the same city. I know that from the court's visitation schedule. He doesn't look at me during drop-offs, says nothing beyond pleasantries to the kids. I don't need anything more. I no longer think about where Amber might be. Once I came across an Instagram account. New name, new pictures, a seemingly different life. I didn't click follow. I didn't need to know if she was happy or remorseful. My life no longer lived in their shadow. One Sunday while I was preparing a batch of muffins with Lily in the kitchen, Aiden walked out holding his laptop. Mom, did you upload the new episode today? You said this week you'd talk about the first step after letting go. I smiled. I remember. But this week I think I want you to tell it. Me? He blinked. Yes. Would you like to speak to kids like you about what it's like to live in a family that broke but didn't fall apart? Aiden thought for a moment, then nodded. Only if I get to pick the background music. Lily chimed in. I'll design the cover art for that episode. I leaned against the kitchen door frame, quietly watching the two of them argue excitedly about font styles and opening piano notes. Aiden insisted on Bach, while Lily campaigned for a modern movie score. In the middle of their laughter, their back and forth, and the late afternoon light spilling through the window, I felt a kind of peace. Deep, real. I used to think my story ended the night I exposed the betrayal in front of everyone. But it didn't. That was only the moment the mask dropped. The real story began when I finally faced myself. Without excuses, without shrinking, without living by anyone else's expectations. When I chose to step out of the shadows, not to defeat anyone, but to reclaim the life I had let others steer for far too long. I didn't forgive to ease their conscience. I forgave because I deserved to live a life not chained to bitterness. I don't need anyone to validate my worth anymore. I've rebuilt myself piece by piece, with truth, with courage, and with the old wounds I no longer deny. And it's from that place that I've come to understand something. The one thing no one can ever take from me is the power to choose how I move forward, on my own 2 feet, with a heart that has learned how to heal itself. My story may end here, but I believe there are still many out there living in silence, standing at crossroads that seem impossible to cross. If you've ever felt betrayed, if you've ever had to learn how to rise from brokenness, or if you've ever looked in the mirror and quietly wondered, am I living as the person I was meant to be? I invite you to share your thoughts. I want to hear from you. And if my journey has made you feel even a little less alone on your own path, don't forget to follow the channel to keep walking alongside more honest stories about family, about pain, and about the power of rebirth we all carry within us.